Here's something that sounds strange when you say it out loud. A federal judge tells a sheriff to stop breaking the law. The sheriff doesn't stop breaking the law. He keeps going. The court convicts him, and before he's sentenced, the president pardons him. No twist. That's just what happened. Joe Arpaio was the sheriff of Maricopa County, Arizona. He built a national reputation for being quote-unquote tough on immigration. And by tough, he meant visible. Chain gangs, tent jails in the desert heat, public punishment meant to send a message. Supporters called it law and order, but the people living under it felt something closer to fear. And most of the people caught in that system were Latino. Hold on to that. Eventually, the Department of Justice investigated his office. They found racial profiling. People were being stopped and detained not because of crimes, but because deputies assumed something about them based on appearance. You can't detain people simply because you suspect they might be undocumented. Follow the Constitution. That was the rule. And when people hear racial profiling, it can sound abstract. So here's what it looked like. A Latino man was driving in Maricopa County with members of his family. Nothing dramatic, just going about their day. Deputies pulled them over. No violent crime, no drugs, no warrant. Instead, deputies began questioning everyone about immigration statuses. The family was detained on the roadside for hours while deputies tried to determine whether anyone in the car was undocumented. No charges were filed, no crime uncovered, just suspicion based on who they were and how they looked. That stop later became part of the federal lawsuit against Arpaio's office. A judge ruled deputies were unlawfully detaining Latino drivers, meaning families like this one were treated as suspects just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And if you've ever driven home with your kids or parents after work, you know how easily that day could have been yours. Now here's where things get confusing. Some people say the Supreme Court later allowed this kind of policing, but that's not exactly what happened. The court never said police can stop people because of race. What it allowed was this. If police make a lawful stop for some other reason, they can ask about immigration status. But race alone still cannot legally justify a stop. The difference is subtle. On paper, stops have to be justified by neutral reasons. In practice, those reasons can sometimes overlap with communities that already get watched more closely. So profiling becomes harder to prove even when people still experience it. Which means Arpaio didn't get in trouble for enforcing immigration law. He got in trouble for using race and suspicion as shortcuts and ignoring a judge who told him to stop. The judge ordered Arpaio's office to change course. He didn't. Not gradually, not accidentally. He kept going. Which is why the court later used words like intentional and willful. Judges don't use those words casually. Ignoring a federal court order has a name: criminal contempt of court. And regular people go to jail for that. Joe Arpaio was convicted. And for a brief moment, accountability showed up. Sentencing was scheduled. And then President Donald Trump pardoned him, not after appeal, not after reconsideration, but before sentencing. The crime stayed on the record. However, the consequences disappeared, and that tells you something important. In America, some people don't escape the law. They escape the consequences. Joe Arpaio wasn't pardoned because the law was confusing. He wasn't pardoned because the facts were unclear. He was pardoned after defying a judge while harming communities with little political protection. And that's interesting. Because when most people ignore a court order, they don't get mercy. They get punishment. If a poor person ignores a judge, it's called non-compliance. If a black or brown woman violates probation, it's treated like a character flaw. But when a powerful lawman breaks the law in the name of control, it becomes leadership, sometimes patriotism. It really depends on who's telling the story. And if this feels like history, look around. Immigration enforcement today still produces deadly encounters in American cities, public spaces, federal agents, people killed during operations. Officials argue about terminology, but communities are left dealing with loss. And when lethal force starts to feel routine, people begin asking a hard question. Who actually gets protected when things go wrong? History tells us protection isn't distributed equally, and people who've rarely been protected first have reason to worry. I'm not speculating, I'm just observing. Pardons are supposed to be about mercy, but mercy has always followed a pattern. Joe Arpaio wasn't forgiven because the law was unclear. He was forgiven because enforcing it would have been inconvenient. And when inconvenience matters more than harm, ordinary people become collateral damage. Anyway, that's the pattern.